Good afternoon. There's plenty of room up front for those brave enough. No? All right. Well, good afternoon. My name is Aamir Paul. I'll have the privilege of hosting this exceptional panel. I want to introduce my panelists here in a minute. I have the opportunity of leading Schneider Electric's North America operation. And Schneider Electric last year was voted by Time and Statistica as the most sustainable company in the world. And we had the privilege just this week to be voted by Corporate Knights, a Canadian rating agency, as the most sustainable company again, twice. So it's something that we have built in our ethos, something we spent the last 20 years working on. And it's something that we are wrestling with as we think about AI. We are also one of the largest providers of data center infrastructure in the United States. And we can see the impact it's having on the grid. We can see the impact it's having on generation. I'm meeting with the governor later today, and one of the questions is, should they extend the life of a coal-fired power plant? And so on the one hand, you have source inputs that are quite concerning, that actually go against our long-term goals of reducing carbon. And on the other hand, you have this incredibly transformative technology that can actually solve these problems faster. For example, think of AI in a distributed energy environment where you have many, many homes with generation capability in a bi-directional relationship with the grid, and a lot of those micro decisions that today are impossible to orchestrate, AI can help orchestrate much faster. So, like any technology change, there are pros and cons. Like any technology change, there's a way to navigate those. One of the things we have conviction on is leaning into AI, being, to use my president's term, AI dominant, coming out of the announcement yesterday, does not mean that we have to give up existing goals. But how do we get that right? What are the corporate initiatives, and what are the applications that makes the most sense? That's what we're here to talk about. And luckily, that is all you will hear from myself, because I have the privilege of an incredible panel. Jenny leads the sustainability practice at Bain. Maria is head of AI applications and impact at the World Economic Forum. And Mary is SVP and Chief Sustainability Officer at Cisco. So thank you all for joining me. I guess, change anxiety with new technology. What will AI do to sustainability? Again, the US microcosm is an interesting, but I assure you, not the only example of this. Where on the one hand, we've had seemingly a rollback on focus here. On the other hand, massive investments in AI infrastructure. That's just the last 24 hours if you're keeping note. So AI, friend or foe? And Jenny, maybe we'll just start with you.
Yeah, sure. Look, I think it's too early to call, but it could go either way, actually. So on the foe side, obviously, there's the energy usage, which you've talked about. There's also the potential dark sides of AI. They're built on models that are from history, and history has a lot of biases that then get kind of programmed into those models. And so there could be some challenges from that perspective. I will try to channel my optimistic side, however, and there's actually quite a lot of things where it should be on the friend side. Now, I do a lot of work in the food and ag space, and so I'll offer some examples you don't always hear on AI in an AI discussion. So, for example, in product development, Syngenta, they're trying to come out with new seeds that are drought adapted because, of course, the climate is changing, warming, and we need seeds that can handle drought. And they're using AI to work through the varietals much faster so they can get those products to market much faster. You can take John Deere. They are marrying data from their equipment, from the sensors they have on the equipment, with satellite data, and using AI to provide highly tailored advice to farmers to increase their productivity with much lower usage of fertilizers, pesticides, etc. That's a friend. I'll just give you another example, which I heard this morning, which is on the social side, still in food. iFood, which is a food retailer, internet food retailer in Brazil. They have a lot of drivers that are kind of on the lower end of the economic scale, can't fully afford insurance, but you can't have them without insurance. They've done a deal with MetLife to provide almost no cost insurance to their drivers. How have they paid for that? They've worked with MetLife using AI to get rid of insurance fraud And all of the savings in insurance fraud, they're then able to channel into this program of providing greater insurance for their drivers. And actually they've managed to eliminate 97% of the fraud, and now all of their drivers have affordable insurance that they can then be safe on the roads. And so these are just a few examples that I think tend to the friend side, but friend or foe, I think we'll see how that develops.
Mary, you're in the middle of this, literally.
Yeah. So first, maybe I should say I am a New Yorker, and my astrological sign is Scorpio. So I think most people are both friends and foes. So this just may follow that path. I do think it is going to be a seismic change. We know it's going to require a lot of energy. We know it's going to be felt in the data center. But that also creates a lot of momentum and opportunity. Cisco's been around for 40 years, and I think connecting people, devices, and network, and I think at the end of the day, in some ways this is a known problem. We can really model this out, and I think on the friend side, what it can do just to help us think through climate disasters. How can we adapt our communities? How can we use IoT devices in the field that will give much more early warning signs for us as communities to take care of? I'm so thoughtful about what just most recently happened in LA. So to me, just like any other technology, mindfully deployed, it can be a source for good.
That's great. That's great. Your thoughts?
I fully agree that, like Jenny said, I think it's too early to tell. I work at the Forum and we work with many different industries, and certainly opportunities are huge. Sustainability, first of all, if we look at and take a step back, it's not certainly broader than climate change, and the applications we see on AI for climate change, for decarbonization, for fire prevention, biodiversity losses are many, and it's very inspiring. Looking at industries, actually, we see a lot of efficiency gains thanks to AI. We work a lot with the network of lighthouses, of which, by the way, Schneider is part, and we saw that the sustainability lighthouses have actually gains in efficiency thanks to AI between 10 and 60%, depending on the use cases. And we know that now AI can help with the grid, with the integration of renewables. AI consumes energy as well, and the predictions say that from now to 2030, the growth of AI energy consumption will be about 50% per year. So the key thing is how do we increase and invest of AI applications that improve sustainability versus how do we lower those circle of big AI applications that currently do not focus or not improve sustainability. So how do we ensure AI innovations? It's towards sustainability, with sustainability embedded in the KPIs, and I think the things will be decided in the next years.
Well, thank you for bringing up the sustainability lighthouse. Our experience at Schneider, we had the opportunity to take really old existing plants and start with the basics, right? Get the data right, get the architecture right, map the processes. And those facilities deploying those technologies were able to achieve this lighthouse status. So I think the first thing is to get the data architectures right, but it's not just greenfield applications, it's actually deploying it today in buildings, factory operations, and infrastructure, homes that can make a big difference. But you mentioned increasing energy demand, and everyone, Bain, McKinsey, everyone's got incredible projections. All of them talk about demand growth. Of course, always. But they're all talking about incredible demand growth, and Europe just went through an energy crisis coming out of the Ukraine war, and we've talked a lot about supply side when we think about sustainability in Scope 3. So we have all those drivers, and yet at the same time, let's take the average, though the Bain numbers, of course, most accurate, that it's going to triple. The data center electricity demand is going to triple. And the investments needed in the grid, who pays for that investment? So talk us through how you're thinking about how you're advising clients on the demand side as they think about data center infrastructure. Mary, maybe I'll start with you.
I mean, I do think, our world has just not been designed for sustainability. If I think about traditionally how we deploy technology, always on, multiple redundancy. So I do think we need to rethink everything. And that does start with reimagining the data center, but it even kind of starts all the way with your product itself. How are we really incorporating energy efficiency as well as other circular design principles into how you develop product. But then I do think one of the most critical parts, it could be because my first job in technology was as a sales engineer, like I designed the network, so I always thought we were the most important. But what we're seeing is when you design, let's say, a new data center, the physical footprint is often half the size. So think about what that does in terms of lowering the cost of running it, lowering the cost of energy, the ability to think about lowering costs or new forms of cooling. Then on top of it, I do think there is more and more opportunity to manage it. We've got one example, a school district in the UK, where just being able to manage and observe, and just by actually turning off Wi-Fi at night, 52% reduction in energy. So this energy management is going to be a critical opportunity. Deciding and choosing, maybe when do I actually upload maybe the new software, or where is not just the cheapest energy potentially in my network, but the most renewable. And I think the last part is always going to be where. I think this is a critical part in terms of where you think about your buildings, your offices, your labs, your data centers. I always just think about where we live, work, and create. Can we create that resiliency? So I do think this is a problem over 40 years that has always, everything from a technology needs to be plugged in somewhere. And so this is probably one of the most innovative challenges that our engineers are grappling with.
Jenny, sovereignty of data in an AI environment and having the capability is going to become a bigger and bigger topic. So as you advise clients to think about how to build national strategies, or at least optimizing the geography, building the same topic, how are you asking them to think about this?
Yeah, look, I think what's very interesting is that you have some data which absolutely needs to be protected, but the other opportunity with AI is you can start to share, actually, and instead of everybody needing to get data like each of themselves, what you start to see is sometimes companies collaborating to make sure that you can actually pull common data onto a base platform. Just to give you an example, again, in the agri-food space, all 4 of the big agri-traders, or all 5 of the big agri-traders, are getting asked by Pepsi, Nestle, Unilever, et cetera, for data on their value chains. Often they're the same. And so those companies have come together to create a data repository where they can have similar definitions, they can source some of the base data, they're using AI because now you don't have to go into the field with checklists and do it kind of farmer by farmer. You can get a lot of satellite data. And so they're pulling that into an AI-enabled system called Tract, which allows them to be much more efficient on the data, but also being very clear, where do they need that, where can they benefit from the data commons, and where actually then do they need to make sure their data, their farms, are not obvious, for example, to all of their competitors, so they can be providing competitive advantage. And so that's how I've seen a number of players think about this, where it can be common, where it can be proprietary, but what that means is you can actually be more efficient in how you're assembling the data and using AI, so you're not having to do it again and again and again in the fight for common resources and energy usage.
And one of the examples again that is quite intriguing that hasn't been executed is using different resources. So Canada, for example, has an incredible amount of hydropower, and one of the projects right now underway is looking at New York and Quebec. Can that hydropower be funneled in the United States? So the data sovereignty will be in the US, but the power source will be Canadian hydropower. And so collaborations like that, I think, are going to be incredibly important. Here in Europe, you've had markets like Ireland that were the gateway markets for data centers that have really hit, at least temporarily, this wall, and they've sort of stopped that investment. How are you seeing this conversation happen in markets as they want to participate in this boom, but they also have to take care of their infrastructure for energy?
Yeah. No, we feel like we're working a lot at the forum, of course, on the topic of AI and energy, and infrastructure is centering the agenda. And when it's about taking action on AI and energy, we look at 3 different blocks. One block is infrastructure. So in infrastructure, as you said, we need to look at end-to-end, both inside, so the hardware, new patterns when it comes to cooling, the software as well, so what goes inside an infrastructure, and we saw a lot of improvement actually in algorithms, and tech companies are telling us actually more and more are coming, but also the location. And can actually we build those grids and smaller grids that allow for renewables to be integrated closer to data centers and infrastructure versus putting the data centers and infrastructure in one locations and then bringing the energy right from far. So from our perspective, we see this as a key area of action. But it's also really interesting to look at the full life cycle of AI. What is the value chain of AI and what are the gaps? And looking at the life cycle is where also then companies can benchmark among themselves to see how can I be more sustainable. And one very interesting data that I think it's dark data. I think companies every day produce 1.3 billion gigabytes of dark data. So data that is not used, is there, and it's consuming energy, which it's about 3 million flights from New York to London. So those are some of the levers, some of the actions that companies could actually look at into now. But then when it comes to action, what we really see is that, again, investing on those applications and use cases that have sustainability at the core. And AI algorithms are really good when it comes to very complex problems. So managing problems, for example, in the supply chains, in the logistics, or are very good when there are very big inefficiencies. So we see now trucks, I think between 10% or 30%, depending on the statistics of trucks, are traveling empty. And this is a clear area where AI could improve a lot. But yesterday I was reflecting on this panel and I was thinking, okay, if this conversation happened 10 years ago, what would we be talking about? And I feel like 10 years ago the talk could be AI or we need technology. While here technology and infrastructure is getting there. So the big challenge I feel of this time is implementation. How can we do and get implementation right?
I want to come back to that, but one theme that we're talking to policymakers around all over the world is if you think about the grid architecture today, it's single directional. You generate, you transmit and distribute, which by the way is an incredibly inefficient process. Roughly 60% of every electron generated is lost in transmission and distribution, just the physics of it. And then you consume, and that's it. And I want you, some of you are not old enough to remember this, but most of you are. I want you to go back to your pre-iPhone experience. Data, as Mary can attest to, was a single directional experience. And then we started with a bi-directional experience. Upload became a thing. And we became very comfortable with this idea that we were engaging in data in two simultaneous collaborative networks, a cellular network and a Wi-Fi network. Now imagine an energy system that is two networks, a distributed energy closed system and a larger system. And technology and software is orchestrating real time between the consumption points to make that happen. Because public infrastructure has to work for the public, and you can't have energy cost rise for everybody, but you also have to be competitive. And so we think the fundamental architecture of the grid and the energy system has to change as part of this evolution. And any thoughts on that, by the way, before I move on?
I think sometimes we miss that point because we talked a lot about AI and energy, and I always think energy power. And this is where, again, when people realize in certain areas of the world, the grid is from the 60s or 70s. Now, I know fashion comes back, but I'm not sure we want the grid technology. and I think this is where we have to modernize it. It also is much more complex, but you've got more variable, more complex energy. I think so energy sources. I also think it is such a critical point for not only doing business, but living our life, so how do we secure it? And I think we talk a lot about the opportunity of AI, but if we don't modernize the grid, we will never reach the capability. And this is where, in my mind, I've spent 25 years at Cisco, and a lot of what we talked about is how do we close the digital divide, and we haven't. There are better connectivity, not everyone has the same amount or enough. But then, as you introduce AI, that data divide, will we have access to really solid, verifiable data that allows us fantastic insights that can be acted against? But then if we're not thoughtful, we will create an energy divide. And you may see certain organizations thrive because they've already recognize the demand and are investing today, and or you live in a community where the grid is so stressed. And as a chief sustainability officer, I think one of the things that I've got to grapple with is not just today, not the next 2 years, but what do we need in 2030, 2040, 2050? Imagine what we need in technology. And I think what was one moment that I was so proud of this year is helping our investment team at Cisco, where generally we've done a lot of technology investments. Usually it's in security or networking or data center or collaboration, but we've made an investment in a new form of energy, wave technology. And this was because I helped them understand the criticality for us to reach net zero. The only way we're going to do it is add more forms of energy that will be supported by a secure and stable grid.
You know, one of the examples that we are very optimistic about, this is an analogy that we don't know will play out, but we hope it does, is if you think about connectivity in India, they skipped landlines altogether,
Yeah.
and they went straight to cellular. And if you think, you know, we're talking about places like Ireland, the United States, and Western Europe, but there's a large part of the world that still access to energy is an issue.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the energy systems that are built for that part of the world can skip a generation and be built as bidirectional distributed systems. And there's real hope to take this capital and catalyze that different architecture. I want to go to my next question, and Maria, I'll start with you. The theme here is collaboration in intelligent age. We know for most companies, over 90%, actually probably over 95% of their total carbon emissions are scope 3. We know that collaboration with their supply chains upstream and downstream are critical. Talk to us a little bit about how AI can help us go faster in that most complicated part of the carbon equation.
Yeah, it's a very key question, especially for me that I'm part of the forum, because the forum has been founded with the principle of collaboration at its core, and we reflect as employees about it every time, and we feel there has never been a greater time in which collaboration has been more important. And I feel it's two perspectives. There's the perspective on collaboration among people to solve challenges across supply chains and across industries, which in this case are specifically interesting and challenging as well, because before already it was collaboration among industry domains, knowledge, and the technology, and now we need to add sustainability as well. So how the three pillars can come together, and how can we unlock collaborations among people about these three different domains, because it cannot be only a technology conversations, and unfortunately oftentimes when we talk about AI, it is a technology conversation, so how can we bring the 2/3 words together? And then the other piece on collaboration is collaboration with governments, because we talk a lot about, when it comes about AI, about trust and safety principles, which are key. Can we think as well about sustainability principles that come from the government for industries and for supply chains as well? And other two elements that come to my mind when it comes to collaborations to enhance sustainability on the supply chain, one is investors. We feel there are a lot of interesting applications that could interest investor for the risk in climate change, but of course it's about investors collaborating with technology domain experts and unlocking that knowledge to scale those right applications. And then collaborations across companies. So as we work a lot across industries and supply chains and many companies, there is a willingness to share what are the best-in-class applications on AI when it comes to sustainability. And actually one of the programs that we launched yesterday is called the Frontier Minds program. And the idea is really, can we spotlight across industries, across supply chains, what are those solutions that are emerging for companies to come together and collaborate and learn from each other. I think the good thing is that there is a lot of energy for collaborating, and so we're hopeful that this will help drive progress.
I like that, a lot of energy for that. Jenny?
Yeah, look, I think Maria, you just ticked through the different kinds of collaboration. I may offer a couple of examples and then just add one category. I think collaboration amongst companies, I talked a little bit about that in the agri space as they've come together to collaborate around their data. There's another one though, which is collaboration between different parts of the value chain. Again, like the farmer is the one who's got the data, but they need to be enabled with equipment providers. They need to collaborate with people that are developing applications that can synthesize that into insight. And that kind of collaboration is hugely important and not always comfortable, because it may be that, you've got two big companies that are used to more negotiating as opposed to collaborating, and then they're reaching into a supply chain that often can be quite far away. And so that's a collaboration that has to happen. With also some concerns, right? So, farmers kind of giving up their data. Well, why do you need my data? Should I be keeping that? Are you going to be using this to kind of measure me and beat me up, in the procurement process? You mentioned collaboration with governments, and that's another one where you have to proceed quite cautiously. And so, to try to get ready for EUDR, JDE, which is one of the world's largest coffee players, has been working on an AI-powered solution to show that where they are sourcing from is deforestation free, and also to then figure out if there are pockets at risk where there might be deforestation, that they collaborate with governments to be able to take action in those spots. So they can then say, actually, we have assured that 97% is 100% free, and there's this 3 that we're working with the government. But of course, governments don't always want that level of visibility into the eye in the sky that's looking and bringing that to the world's attention. And so if you, they've gotten a number of governments on board with MOUs in this, but then there's a number that are starting to push back and that are very wary. And so thinking about actually the flip side, and what are some of the worries if this data gets in and AI and suddenly kind of spitting out all this insight that may make them uncomfortable. The last category that I would add is collaborating within the company in a very different way, because of course as you design things, you need to take, using AI, you also then need to take sustainability, you need to take energy usage into account. And I'll just give you one example. A beauty player, beauty companies want to put videos on their apps, and so they can show off all of their different products and people looking beautiful. And of course, if you're the designer of that video ad, you want it to be the perfect, high res, which takes a lot of data, a lot of information. But actually, most people are looking at it on their phone. And so they need a bit of input to say, you don't need the energy usage, you don't need all of the kind of sustainability, carbon emissions kind of impacts from that. Actually, you could dial that back. Now, if it's just the design team designing it, they would never come up with that because for them, they want it to look perfect on the big screen, on any screen. And so I think it's that collaboration within the companies can also then help to make AI more manageable in terms of energy usage, data usage, while still making it work for what it is it's being designed to do.
I love that example. I have a few more topics I'd like to cover with the panel, but let me pause here and open it up for Q&A from the audience.
Hello, thank you very much for a great discussion. I'm Thorsten Lichtenau from Bain. A question, we talk often about the impact that AI can have on climate, and clearly we need a vast acceleration. And while some of the applications will have an impact in 10, 15 years, like accelerated fusion, I was wondering if you've seen use cases that can really make a dent and have a big impact in the near term, in which areas you've seen the biggest potential. Maybe it's a question for you, Maria, you mentioned that great initiative you have.
So quite a few interesting, and I'll also end with a question that we hear all the time from companies we work with a lot with climate change. But so first of all, no sustainability. What it is sustainability? Decarbonization. In decarbonization, we see really interesting use cases when it comes to energy in buildings, HVAC. Those are most of the use cases we see from the sustainability lighthouses that have the greatest impacts are in this area, in this domain. We see really interesting, so then when it comes to biodiversity losses, actually, we've been collaborating also with the UN, and there is really interesting use case on how with computer vision you can track biodiversity losses and take some actions on that. Floods as well. I think floods have really interesting applications on how you can predict floods. I think if I remember correctly, with all the data that we had about weather, we were able to predict the floods 7 days in advance, and this program is already in place in some international organizations, and before it was not possible. So there are some more investments and more directionality on these use cases is needed, because there are also a lot of use cases that don't have any impact on sustainability, right? And the question that also we ask ourselves, it's like looking more at the macro picture. Are all those use cases, even if they are at scale, enough? Or what are the other R&D investments and big innovations that we need to combat climate change?
You know, one mental model I would suggest is when you have lots of distributed actions that need to be orchestrated with micro adjustments. So HVAC is a great example. Think of an entire community. We just built with Lennar Homes, a community in the United States, where, and you love this, the shocking feature is that if PG&E cuts the power off, you'll still have power. Because that community is built with 200 homes with a microgrid and a battery in every home. Now, they need their own little germs that can manage and also work with PG&E as a demand response system. So micro adjustments over distributed assets, and HVAC comes into that, home energy systems come into that, vehicle to grid mechanisms come into that, because they're all small adjustments that need an orchestration layer. And I think that's a first starting point in terms of types of use cases.
Maybe if I just add to that, so take that example. One of the most next steps is adding security to it. The more critical this infrastructure is, you add AI to the ability for us to detect, to be able to identify a potential threat and contain it, maintaining your existing data work process on and on, the ability to provide quick options coaching to that security team. This to me, as I think about just global threats, again, so many even smaller municipalities that may not have the inherent in-person teams. I think the ability for us to build these microgrids, on top of that, the security, and ultimately, it's this combination of how do we capture information, but ultimately translate it into actual insights.
Other questions? All right, well, while you think of them, let me go back to one I had prepared, which is, you know, you're all leaders in sustainability. As you curate, a few years ago, what is a CSO was a question we were answering, right? I think we figured that out. And more we're seeing those roles become critically important in corporate strategy. But now you think about your own organization and training sustainability leaders to think AI first. How do you get your organization ready? How do you get your people ready? Thoughts on that?
You know, I think this is so important because there are the natural people who will adopt new technology. I guess I will share, the first use I used of AI was to take my dog's picture and make cartoons of it, which is now dark data that I've got to eliminate because of it. But I do think it's not just those early adopters of technology, but ourselves. So how do we intentionally think about it? Personally, one of the most important things as a chief sustainability officer, especially now, is that any claim we make, you know it's true. You know it is accurate. You know it's verifiable. You know it's auditable. And so 2 years ago, I built this very human-intensive process to look at every claim. This means every PowerPoint, every blog. Look at what was that claim? Who's the subject matter expert? We reviewed it, legal and finance. Now, building a AI capability that now combine that, it is going to drive significant efficiency, but what it also does is just reinforce trust and relevancy.
Jenny?
Yeah, look, I think that it's actually a really great opportunity to get sustainability a little bit more of a kind of burst of energy, no pun intended, because you know, there's a lot of training on sustainability, and now, you know, people, sustainability, and, you know, it's getting a bit tricky, and, you know, But now actually, like what more would they want to learn about but AI and how AI can also help with sustainability. It's like a win-win because you get cool new tech stuff and you get to feel like a a global champion. And so what we've seen big companies doing, launching challenges around sustainability with AI. And so how do you actually bring that into your use cases? And so you're kind of training on AI, but training on sustainability at the same time. The other thing that we've seen is actually figuring out how AI can help with reporting. There is nothing that people hate more than reporting. And of course, there's a lot more reporting on sustainability, which is coming into people's lives. But AI can be a massive help with that. And so again, this is another way where you can kind of engage AI and sustainability, either take away the pain, create some excitement. And so those are some of the things that we find, and it does bring sustainability a little bit back more into that, oh, this is cool kind of space, as opposed to like, we've been working at this and it's really hard. And that I think is a little bit of a benefit as well.
I love that. Right?
Yeah. I'll probably go back to the point where you mentioned before, Jenny, about the importance of collaboration inside the company.
Yeah.
Because there is probably where the best applications then come out. It's very difficult to hire someone that is, first of all, a domain expert of the industry, and then on top add sustainability, and then on top add AI. So yes, there are trainings, and there are of course people experts on this, but most important is how do we bring these three figures and persons together. And there are very interesting projects companies have been doing by creating these cross-cutting teams that work together with an exciting challenge to improve efficiency of specific operations, or to actually look at the data centers and bring them carbon neutral. Then we feel that that's where, again, most of the energy you create more energy in the team and in the mission as well. But an important element not to forget, because it's the technology and it's also very politicized, it's how do we create trust in the technology. So it's also an exercise of culture and awareness that, again, are not just words, but the big challenge is how do we implement real trust among the people and get feedback from the users and then improve back based on that.
And if I add, one of the things that I think is most critical more than ever is that we tie it back to business and business value. And whether that is look at the cost efficiency that we've gained, whether it's the growth opportunity, whether it's business resiliency. So I do think not only do you need to understand carbon accounting and scopes, but how you're actually supporting the customers, the partners, and I think how work is going to be done differently.
Yeah. Final chance for questions.
It's just crystal clear, man. It's really great. It's
Well,
really
look,
great.
we'll give you an opportunity to mingle, but let me try and sort of recap a few things. First of all, every technology, by definition, doesn't have a moral bent, right? It's how we use it. We all know that. It's been the history of how technology changes have gone through. I think one of the things that we need to be aware of is the impact energy and sustainability means that we have to be really thoughtful about this transition, but that's a responsibility all of us have. Second, I think it's absolutely critical to think about this in terms of where do you begin? And many panels over the last couple of days, people have talked about that you learn so much by doing than planning. And this is one of those where jumping in and testing use cases, getting your teams engaged, giving them sandbox to play in is far better for any organization to get their heads around this. And then finally, I think there's going to be an element of public-private partnerships in this setup that are going to be critical. And that was critical in the internet age, in the telecom infrastructure. It will be absolutely critical here. But we're actually very optimistic, and I think you will find the panel has been very optimistic, that complex distributed problems is what AI was built for. And the foundation starts with great data, great transparency, a great understanding of process, and then you can apply that. When is that tipping point where the use of AI actually overcomes the energy consumption? Nobody knows, okay? But sitting here and trying to, project that is a waste of time. Get started with the work, I think is the advice you heard from everybody. So hopefully that was productive. We'll give you time to mingle with the panel. Thank you very much.